Clear path for BRICS. The United States has taken a step back. It is no longer the titan that imposed its will through sanctions and threats. Trump has made a decision that marks a turning point, allowing China and Russia to negotiate without interference. Washington, unable to halt BRICS' rise, has chosen to surrender in silence. Multipolarity is no longer just a concept, it is a reality. Beijing and Moscow, which once operated cautiously, now advance without opposition, without a Washington to restrain them. They set the terms, the rules, the future. Where is American supremacy? It is crumbling while BRICS moves forward, shaping a new world order. Surrender. The United States has ceded control. It no longer dictates the rules, and China and Russia have won without firing a single shot. The White House has accepted its new role in silence, like a wounded animal that realizes it no longer has the strength to fight. Donald Trump has made a decision that would have been inconceivable just a few years ago, allowing China and Russia to control their respective regions without U.S. interference. This is not merely a diplomatic strategy or a tactical move to buy time. It is an admission of defeat, an acknowledgement that Washington's former power has been overtaken by new forces now dominating the global board. For decades, the U.S. imposed its will through sanctions, military interventions, and economic threats. Now it withdraws, leaving space for its competitors. The anxiety in Washington is evident. In the corridors of the White House and Capitol Hill, voices are lower, speeches less aggressive, gestures less firm. There are no direct threats or promises of retaliation. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has stated it clearly. U.S. foreign policy has lost its way, blinded by the arrogance of believing absolute dominance was eternal. For years, American administrations convinced themselves that the rest of the world would never challenge their authority, that their economy and military were enough to keep competitors in check. But history has proven otherwise. Multipolarity is no longer a distant concept. It is a tangible reality. And now, Beijing and Moscow dictate the new rules. China has played its hand with the precision of an empire that has witnessed centuries of power shifts and the fall of great nations. It did not need to invade or threaten. It simply built its hegemony with money, trade, and influence. While Washington spent trillions on endless conflicts, China wove a network of economic relations that now allows it to act with absolute freedom. Its Belt and Road Initiative has solidified its presence in Asia, Europe, Africa, and Latin America, while its industrial growth has exceeded all expectations. Today, China is the world's factory, the economy setting the pace of global trade, and the U.S. has no way to compete. Russia, for its part, has followed a different but equally effective path. Moscow understands that geopolitics is a game of patience and carefully calculated strategic moves. Instead of seeking direct confrontations, it has strengthened its influence in key areas. While the U.S. was bleeding out in Middle Eastern conflicts, Russia secured its control over Europe's energy supply, forging deals that allow it to decide who gets gas and oil, and on what terms. Its role in international diplomacy has grown quietly but effectively. While Washington attempted to isolate its rivals with sanctions, Moscow forged alliances with emerging powers and strengthened its ties with China, ensuring that the future of global trade and security no longer depends on the West. Meanwhile, the United States is drowning in its own contradictions. Its national debt has surpassed $34 trillion, a financial black hole with no escape. Its industry has been outpaced by foreign competition. Its middle class has been battered by successive economic crises. And its influence in Latin America has crumbled under the advance of Chinese investments and Russian diplomatic presence. Washington is no longer the global reference for stability, but a nation in crisis, where political and social divisions grow by the day. Its internal fractures have weakened its international standing, while the rest of the world watches as the former superpower struggles to maintain its own coherence. BRICS has capitalized on each of these failures to establish itself as the new center of global power. What began as a simple coalition of emerging economies has evolved into a bloc that openly challenges U.S. hegemony. Its combined GDP now surpasses that of the G7 in terms of purchasing power, and its gold reserves continue to grow, while the U.S. keeps printing dollars without backing. Its impact on global trade is undeniable. BRICS internal commerce is expanding rapidly, and each new agreement signed without Washington's participation further weakens the dollar's influence. The U.S. has tried to frame this surrender as a strategic retreat, but the truth is impossible to hide. It is not withdrawing by choice. It has no other option. It can no longer set the rules of the game or impose its will without consequences. Its attempts to maintain control through sanctions have failed. Russia and China have demonstrated that they can operate without relying on the West. Every sanction has only accelerated their transition towards self-sufficiency. While Washington sought to isolate Moscow, Moscow moved closer to Beijing. While the White House aimed to weaken Beijing, China secured trade agreements with dozens of countries, solidifying its dominance in the global economy. China and Russia have not only displaced the United States in terms of influence, but they have also created a new model of international relations, one where the White House is no longer the center of decision-making. Beijing has proven that diplomacy and investment can be more powerful tools than missiles and aircraft carriers. Meanwhile, Moscow has leveraged its geopolitical expertise to reshape power dynamics. BRICS, with its steady growth, has begun imposing its own rules, and more nations are looking toward the bloc for stability and development. The era when an American president could slam his fist on the table and make the world tremble is over. The United States remains a power, but it is no longer the only one, nor the most feared. Its influence shrinks by the day, and its future is uncertain. Washington still clings to its old rhetoric of global leadership, but the world has changed. Now real power lies with BRICS, with China and Russia, with nations that have built a new order without needing permission from the West. The United States still has military might, still has bases around the world. But what it has lost is the most important thing: moral authority, the ability to impose its vision without question. Once, countries obeyed Washington without protest. Today, they seek alternatives. The dollar is no longer untouchable. The U.S. economy is no longer the global benchmark, and its government no longer inspires confidence. Its influence has faded, and in its place, new powers have emerged, powers that have capitalized on every American misstep to strengthen their position. Washington's surrender is not just an isolated event, but the reflection of a process that has been unfolding for years. The United States is no longer the center of the world, and its retreat is the final act of an empire that has realized its time has passed. China and Russia have won, and they did so without needing a conflict. The world is changing, and the BRICS nations are reshaping global power. Don't miss out on the full story. Hit that like button, subscribe for more eye-opening content, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. What do you think about this shift in power? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.